Get started? Good morning. Welcome to T's first session in Seoul. Thanks to Daniele for the nice picture showing our wonderful host city. This is T's. You should know that. The usual links are on the page. We will, we'll ask for people to help out on data tracker, on Etherpad. Don't go to data tracker, go to the tools page and click on Etherpad 97 if you'd like to help out with our crowdsourced note taking. It's really very beneficial, even if you just contribute one correction, one addition, that's really helpful. Given that this is the first meeting of the week, it's worthwhile to remind everyone of the IETF Note Well. Basically, things you say here become part of the IETF record. It becomes part of the public record. We are recorded. We have voice and video being recorded, and anything you say is considered a formal contribution to the IETF. So I think we've covered these points. One addition, we are using Jabber for folks who would like to type remotely and provide input. We'll be watching that. If you want to watch it yourself, that's great. If there's a comment said in the Jabber room and I don't mention it, please feel free to come to the mic and channel that person. Once again, there's the link to the Etherpad. Click Etherpad 97, add to it. Our working group secretary, Matt, is actually not here. In the past, he's listened in, streamed remotely, and helped take notes. As he is not here or online, your contribution to the note-taking would be really appreciated. Sense a pattern to that one? So let's talk a little bit about where we stand in terms of working group documents. We have one recent RFC. It was a bit of a slog to get that there. In fact, I didn't realize it was only that recent. We've been working on it so long and sort of felt like we'd pushed it on quite a while ago. So sometimes it takes a while for things to pop out. But thank you to the authors for driving that one home. A bunch of you are in the room. Really, thank you. SRLG collect is in off 48, so that should soon be published. And we have a couple that are off in queue being processed by the ISG. LSP fast reroute has been one that we've been trying to get out for a little while. We've gone through a couple of last calls. There's been a bunch of changes along the way. It's going to have another last call. It's on the agenda, so we'll hear more about that. LSP diversity, we've also gone through last call. There's been comments on the list. The authors sent out a preview version for me to review as Shepherd. I thought it was good to go, and I was about to hit send, and I said, let me give one last read, and I found an issue. And I sent the authors, I actually meant to CC the list. I responded to just a private message. So there's a comment that went to just the authors about needing a couple of more clarifications on RFC 2119 language. It's like 3 or 4 places. It shouldn't be big. The authors have already said to me privately that they're going to do an update this week. So I'm hoping that we can have this, the publication request in, if we're lucky, this week, maybe next week, but it shouldn't be long, presuming that we get the new version. Look for the new version, look for the 4 or 5 changes of new capitalization. It's not doing any technical change, it's really just clarification of how the document's written. We do have a couple of new working group documents, and in fact, this last one was gray because at the time we put the slides together, it wasn't issued, but it came out just before the session. So that second draft is available as a working group document. We have one liaison. Please take a look at it. If you have comments, send it to the list. I don't recall if it was asking for a specific response.
It didn't. No response.
I think it was just, yeah, I think it was just informational. At this point, everyone's familiar with our IPR process. While it's not something part of the formal working group process, it is something we follow, and now most of the routing area follows this, so it's pretty familiar. But if you have questions, please feel free to ask at the mic or come to, or send email to the list. Brings us to the list. We've had, we tend to have a lot of really good discussions on our drafts. Unfortunately, most of the discussions take place among authors and interested parties, and then we come back with sometimes a big change, and or a change in direction. And there hasn't been any discussion on the list, and the working group doesn't really understand what's going on. They're not part of the process. We really have to have those good discussions on the list. It makes it so that the participants, others can contribute, and even if they don't contribute, they know the discussion's happening and had the opportunity to contribute and an opportunity to weigh in on their view of consensus. And it is important from the consensus process in the end to have those discussions as much as possible. And I still have discussion, even this meeting, we've had discussions of these authors have been talking and they want to do something different. They haven't talked about it on the list. You need to talk about it on the list. In terms of administrivia, we have this is our only tease session. We do have a joint session to focus on Yang topics because there's so much cross-pollination of ideas, some synergy of solutions. And we have the joint session this time graciously hosted by the CCAMP working group, and we have that later today. And with that,
we have the working group draft updates coming up next. We currently have 16 active working group documents. There's one in our CATS queue, a couple for which we just put in publication requests, and there are 7 on the agenda today, so that leaves us with 6, and I will go over the status in the next few slides. First up is the LSP diversity draft. So there were some outstanding comments after the last call. The authors did publish a version addressing those comments. As Lou mentioned, there's still one outstanding issue that needs to get addressed. So when that goes in, please do give it a read and make sure that all open items have been addressed. Next is the T-metric recording draft. We did not receive a status update for this. There were a set of comments that were sent out to the list early June. We did talk about that at the last meeting as well. We haven't seen those get addressed yet. There was an update to the draft, but that was primarily done to keep the draft active. So since we didn't really get any status update, I guess we would like to ask the authors if they're still interested in pursuing this. So if there's anybody from the authors team present here and would like to weigh in, now would be a good time. I don't see anyone coming to the mic. Let me ask the room, how many of you still think that the working group should be working on this? Can I get a show of hands, please?
So a few people.
Few people. That's good input. Thanks. Next is the experimental draft on ingress protection. There was an update to the draft primarily to address a couple of comments that were made at the last IETF meeting. The authors believe that there are no more open issues and are requesting last call. Given the experimental status of the draft, from a technical standpoint, I think this sufficient. It's sufficiently big for us to take it to the next step. I also think that the document could benefit from a good editorial scrub. So we'll try and get that done in the coming weeks and take it to last call. Next up is the network assigned upstream label draft. No changes since the last IETF, no open issues, and the authors believe that this is ready for last call. How many of you have read this document? Read the current version of the document?
Just a couple.
So we would like you guys to review it further and reach out to the authors if you have any questions. Next is the RSVPT scaling recommendations draft. There was an update made to this draft. The changes were primarily to do with removing references to a couple of in-progress FRR drafts. Those were done to address a specific comment. There's still one outstanding item in terms of splitting the document into two. The authors intend to discuss and resolve it on the list in the coming weeks. The last in this slide set is the newly adopted PC central control draft. The authors think that this may already be sufficiently baked. So if you don't agree with that assessment, please do reach out to the authors and let your concerns known. That brings us to the end of this slide set. The next topic is open issues in the TE tunnels model. Rakesh would be presenting that. This draft would be presented twice today. In this morning session, the authors will be focusing only on the open issues, and then the session later in the day, they would be focusing on giving an overall update on the progress of the draft. Open issues.
Hi everyone, my name is Rakesh Gandhi and I'm presenting update to TE and RSCP model on behalf of the authors. Is it better? Yeah, sorry. So there are, I think, 2 or 3 issues, open issues right now that the team is working on. The first issue, this was discussed in the last IETF. We have 3 options. This is regarding the technology-specific division of the model. Right now, the draft uses option number 3. It looks like one model with different types at the node level. But there are 2 other options as well, like option 1 using groupings and using option 2 for schema mounts. So this is still open. This was discussed at last IETF, and if you have any input, let us know. There is one work item. This is regarding telemetry, counters, and stats. So we need to complete the definition of what counters we want to support. There are some that will be a subset that all vendors support, and then there will be vendor-specific counters. So this is being discussed as well. The third option or the open item being discussed is bandwidth type. This is updated in the topology model. And this is related to the different technology, the packet and optical. Right now, the discussion is to have a string type for the bandwidth, and depending on the format, packet or OTN, bandwidth can be inferred. So there is one item that's also being discussed on the list as compute-only option. So there's pretty good discussion on the mailing list. If you have input, let us know. So next steps for us is to conclude on open issues. We request the further review of the model. There is one more item that we need to finish as well is the PCC-TE data augmentation. So this is working with the PCE team on the Yang model. And that's the update we have for open issues.
Anybody wants to weigh in on the open issues?
So you have more slides. Are you going to go through those, or?
So we have a few slides that cover what updates have been made since last IETF. So we'll go over them this afternoon.
Okay. You actually have another. The next slide is useful for my question. What's your plan for the different models? You have a lot of models in one draft at the moment,
Right.
or modules, excuse me, in one draft. What's your plan?
So there was some discussion. There were 2 or 3 things we discussed. One regarding RSVP, the base itself is very stable. So there was discussion to say, should we separate it and proceed to the next step for the stable part and continue to discuss the extended model, for example. Regarding the TE model, right now it's one model. And there was some discussion to say, should we make a base and extended model even in TE? For example, the compute-only part, can it go to the extended and can it be debated? So that we did discuss briefly, but I guess we'll continue discussion after this IETF.
Okay. I think your idea of branching off the stable parts into their own individual documents, and it would be useful because we can start pushing those documents out. We don't have to wait for everything.
Yeah.
The other thing that becomes is if someone needs to implement a piece, they can go implement the piece that they care about and not have to be concerned with the whole document and conforming with the whole document. I think SR to me is sort of the most extreme example of one that you really don't want to have in a core document. Having it in a single document as we're getting the work done, that's great. It just makes it easier for everyone. But when we start thinking about publishing, we should start peeling off the parts that are more mature and progressing them rather than wait for perfection of the whole.
Right, yeah. Yeah, I think there is one open issue regarding the technology-specific things. Maybe once we resolve that will, because that could affect structure a little bit. So once we conclude on that, the next step could be dividing it into the different models.
Have you talked to anyone specifically from the CCamp or folks who are interested in the technology specific and make sure that, and done a sort of a sanity check that the core models work for folks that only want to implement a specific technology? Let's say if you're just doing OTN or ODUs, does the core models work for that? Has anyone done that sanity check?
Don't remember the explicit sanity check, but in the design team, we do have members from who represent the CCamp, Igor and Xian, and so they are aware of the optical aspects of it, and they have provided feedbacks that's been incorporated as well. But I guess we will present updates today and hoping to get some feedback from CCamp as well.
Okay. Daniele Ceccarelli, you anticipated my first question, which is the relationship between the OTN-based model and for example, the layer 1 model that is already there in CCamp, but I already got to the answer. The second one is regarding the PCC module. I guess it's the path computation client, right?
Yes.
Okay, and there is also another draft that is working on that. The draft from Italo and Sergio on the path computation API. Did you discuss the relationship of what's covering what, or there are just 2 proposals that still needed to be evaluated?
So there has been some discussion and sync up with the PCE team working on the PCE Yang model. And this is one item that we have as next step we need to close on, is the PCC, PCE, and how we augment the TE model for the PCC part of it. So there is some work to be done, but there was some work already done to clean up the TE model so it fits, it's more suitable for PCC use case as well.
Dhruv, Huawei. Rakesh, even with Tarek, when we discussed last time, we don't want the whole model, but we want what is the role of this model to be clarified. Because we have IETF device, and what is the device could be PCC, also an NMS could be PCC, and we also have a PCEP model which is working for both PCC, any PCEP speaker, PCC and PCE. So the role of IETF PCC is still not clear to us. And we have talked about that we will do it. That's okay, but what is it? If that can be clarified maybe in the joint session when PCE working group as well as other working groups are there, that would be very nice.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks.
Okay, thank you. I guess we'll continue the discussion a little bit more this afternoon.
Yes, yeah.
In terms of those last couple of questions, in terms of the structure and peeling off pieces, think about what pieces are stable enough that we can move them forward now.
Yeah, definitely.
Okay,
Yeah,
thank you.
thanks.
Juan?
Good morning, everyone. Today I'm going to talk about egress local protection. So in the last IETF, there's some comments I addressed most of them. So I'll give more details, a little bit more details, description or more concise descriptions in the draft. Okay. So for example, we give a little bit more detail about the pass computation for backup LSP. So when we compute pass, so we need to exclude those primary egress nodes. So also we mentioned about so there's one case we can configure egress nodes or on the protection of backup egress nodes through some kind of indications. So this also gives more details, and this is mentioned a couple years ago in some version. So in addition to that, there's one comment, and I think I need a working group and chair's help. So that's there's a comment which is that the author of egress protection framework draft ask us to put a reference in this draft to his draft, right? So because this is tough for me, because I was thinking very hard to try to resolve this issue, but I'm get stuck there because this draft. So we proposed this draft more than 6.5 years ago. So also we move progress to a document, open group document also for a few years. And then just this year, Yimin Shen proposed a egress protection framework draft. So he asked me to put some kind of stable draft to his not stable framework draft. So it's hard for me to put a reference to there. That's one reason. Another reason is that, so his framework draft, some of contents is borrowed from my draft. I talked to him in the hallway, and so I don't know how can I resolve this issue? So that's why I should appreciate help from working group and also people from there to resolve this issue.
I'm going to put the MPLS chairs on the spot. I think I saw one or two of them, at least. My understanding is that this is the draft you're referring to, draft Shen MPLS egress protection framework, is still an individual draft. The question is for the MPLS working group chairs is where do they think this draft is headed? Do they think it's headed to be something that's brought into the working group or not? I thought I saw at least George.
Loa.
Oh, there's Loa. Thanks. Loa, do you care to answer? I know I'm putting you on the spot and you may not have the answer. I don't even believe it's on the agenda this time. I did a quick check on that.
So you're correct, it's not on the agenda this time. The answer where it's heading is still an individual draft. The working group doesn't have an opinion so far. I think the correct procedure is actually progress this one, and then we see if there is a delta that needs to be covered. If there is, there will be an MPLS working group draft covering that delta, and nothing more.
Okay. From my standpoint, I'm actually fine with mechanism drafts coming before framework and coming before architecture, because to me, those documents, if you don't have a solution, it helps you get your solution. If you have a solution, it helps others understand. So from helping the community understand what your solution is doing, having a framework document, it's fine. If you look at what we did in GMPLS, I think the architecture document was published after we had the solution document, because it was really to help people understand how everything fits together. So from a philosophical standpoint, there's nothing wrong with having a solution come first and then the framework. But there is an issue with having a working group document reference even informational to an individual document. If it's useful context, it's just an informational, non-normative reference. It doesn't hurt.
Okay.
So, and even if it's not a working group. So if you think it provides good context and good background reading that'll help people understand yours, there's nothing wrong with adding that link, adding that reference.
So,
but given it's an individual, if it was working group, I probably would say, recommend that you add an informative link, reference, excuse me. Given it's individual, I'll defer to the authors. I don't know if my co-chair agrees or not. But I don't think it is a negative to refer to a new document that's a framework document, even though you've been working for a long time, if it helps other people understand.
okay. So that means even though I put a reference to that framework draft is not stable, and then that will not block the progress of this draft.
Because it's an informative
Okay.
reference.
Okay,
It's not a normative reference.
So if that's the case, maybe okay.
Yeah. But again, at this point, since it's not a working group draft, read it. If you think it's helpful, add your reference. If you don't think it's helpful, don't add the reference. It's your choice.
Okay.
And if someone in the working group thinks that it's really important, we should hear from them. This is me as an individual, as chair, but it's a suggestion, not a requirement.
Okay, thank you for your suggestion.
Does anyone have an additional opinion? Pavan, you want to?
I'd like to poll. Let's go. Poll.
Okay, so that's the next topic. Anything else you want to?
Yeah, that's all.
Okay, go ahead.
How many of you have read the latest version of the document?
So a few.
How many of you think it's ready for last call?
And that could be people who read earlier versions also. It's approximately, I read it as approximately the same. Yeah, it's a lot less, but it's not a whole lot of people either way.
Okay.
Please read the document, and if you have comments on it, send it to the list. Particularly if you have objections or think it's ready to go, we'll talk offline afterwards and see where we go. It's been around a while. I know that there's some reservation because of the number of implementations out there, or folks doing implementation, and so that makes it a little more challenging. But it seems that we have adequate support to wrap this document up. Okay. Thank you.
Rakesh?
Hi, everyone. My name is Rakesh Gandhi, and I'm presenting an update to the GMPLS FRR draft on behalf of the authors and contributors listed. So outline is as following. We'll take a look at the scope and current status and signaling extensions proposed in the draft. We'll provide an update to the recent updates that's made to the draft and look at the next steps. So the scope of the draft is bidirectional tunnel using GMPLS signaling, packet switch capable using FRR procedures defined in RFC 4090. Current status is it has completed working group last call, and we have addressed the review comments received as part of the working group last call. So basically, we're presenting the updates that we made as a result of the working group last call review. So just to summarize what's in the draft, one requirement is to obtain the merge point label and merge point address, and the draft defines or uses the RRO in the path message to obtain that. The second requirement is that the upstream and downstream PLR needs to coordinate the bypass tunnel assignment. So draft proposes a new sub-object for RRO. It's called the bypass assignment sub-object. And the third requirement is that when using the NN hop bypass tunnel, a node needs to avoid the RSVP software timeout. So basically, the remote side or the upstream PLR needs to reroute ResV and traffic over the bypass tunnel in the reverse direction. So as mentioned, the upstream PLR uses the RRO in the path message to get the merge point label and merge point address. So the draft clarified that the bypass tunnel is in the same direction as the protected tunnel in terms of active and passive side. For the bypass assignment coordination, there is a new RRO sub-object, bypass assignment sub-object. We have added bypass destination address, so this way the upstream PLR knows that there is a bypass tunnel terminating on itself locally. A rule was modified that this object is added after the node ID sub-object in RRO. So this way, node is easier to read that this node is protected by this bypass tunnel. There is a valid case where upstream PLR can receive multiple bypass tunnel assignments. So for example, in this case, a node F can receive a bypass tunnel from node D and node E. This is valid as we want to protect, for example, link DE, node E, and link EF in the forward direction. But unfortunately, node F cannot use both bypass tunnels at the same time. This gets corrected during the re-core out phase after FRR. So there is an improvement in the document now. There is a notify message defined where upstream PLR can indicate to the downstream PLR that it cannot use the bypass tunnel assignment. So this allows the downstream PLR to potentially correct it before the fast reroute occurs. Some other, there is the notify message that define it uses the message from RFC 3473. And based on error spec, there is a new error code defined for bypass assignment error. And there are 3 subcodes also defined in the document. Bypass assignment cannot be used. bypass tunnel not found, and one-to-one bypass tunnel already in use. Some other updates in the draft. We added terminology for downstream and upstream merge point. Added some more details on the reverting behavior. Created a section on unidirectional failure. So there was text at multiple places. We moved it to one section. It's easier to read. We clarified the one-to-one backup method. It uses the detour object. And there are some miscellaneous changes. So there are no open issues at the moment. So summary of the changes are mostly clarification on the few cases and addition of notify message to improve the behavior. So we like to request feedback from the working group on the changes. And working group last call was completed. I heard that we might issue another last call and then proceed with the publication. Thank you.
Comments, questions? So there were some really good changes here. It's worth rereading it if you haven't read it before. I have to say, in my rereading, I got struck with something I didn't pick up on before, and I think I should have. How are you dealing with off-path control?
Off-path control.
So GMPLS has off-path control. You don't have to be doing your control in-band. When I was reading this time, it struck me that it has to be in-band.
Yes.
Is that
in the section? It's the first section. It says this is an issue with in-band where soft state timeout can occur and a few things. Yes, it's.
So what do you do with off-path control for GMPLS? Because GMPLS allows you to do off-path.
Yes. Even for the packet?
Yeah, sure.
Okay.
And that was part of the whole discussion with TP, right?
Right. Yeah, we can look into it and see if there are any changes required for it.
Yeah, it would be good to address that specifically, particularly because, use of FRR and TP environments, some may say isn't allowed, and other people say, of course you have it. Don't really want to get into that debate, but if you are running in that environment, you certainly care about off-path control.
Okay. No, in the introduction itself, we assume that this is for the in-band signaling, but there was the scope of it. But yes, if you see a need for it, if there is an easy small change somewhere that's required, we can look into it.
Yeah, I'm not sure how you can claim that it supports GMPLS without doing that.
Okay.
Yeah, I guess if you hadn't said GMPLS in the title, I don't think Lou would be picking on it. But if I just said bidirectional LSP FRR support, yeah.
Maybe, but I'd like to hear what you. Thank you for saying you'll take a look at it and come back to the list. Obviously, we have a comment in the back.
Yeah, Himanshu from CN. I think Lou, you bring a good point. I think that should be addressed. And I like what Pawan said. Just because you have said GMPLS, you are in a hole. So you have to fix that. Otherwise, you can just say it is RSVP specific. But then RSVP specific already has FRR, not for bidirectional. But yeah, you should address this.
Okay.
It's an important point. Thanks.
Yeah. Thanks.
But given the sheer number of changes you have introduced after the last call, we will issue another last call for this.
Yeah, absolutely. But let's resolve this issue. Look for it on list.
Yep.
And then we can move forward. It'll have to be another last call. Sorry. Good changes though. Definitely good changes.
Yeah, I mean, do appreciate the comments from Adrian. Really good changes.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Let me do this.
View.
I can't really see what I'm doing here. Is there a full screen here? Control what? Control L? All right. Thank you.
Good morning. My name is Young Lee. This is now we are switching to ACTN topic. There are two documents that I'd like to give you an update. One is a requirement and the other one is a framework. The list of co-authors here. So since Berlin meeting requirement draft is stable and ready for the working group last call. So we appreciate someone who can review the document if this is a good to go to the next step. And framework draft has been updated. I think one of the items that the working group asked us is to please clean up all the terminology across requirements and framework and info draft, as well as RFC 7926 interconnected TE, because it defines a lot of terminologies there in TE network. So we try to reference to that RFC for terminology that we use, and we did a lot of cleanup work to make it consistent. And also, I think virtual network, we kind of define in a much more crisp way. So I think I sent this definition to the list. Basically, virtual network is a client view, typically a network slice of the transport networks. And it is presented by the provider as a set of physical and abstract resources. So there's a lot of flexibility how to view that. And depending on the agreement between client and provider, various VN operations are possible, and also various VN views are possible. So, so we kind of define a little bit more of how to create virtual networks and how to operate dynamically, and what is the view of VN in more detail. So virtual network can be pre-configured. Virtual network creation can be pre-configured or created with the negotiation with the statically between customer and the provider. In other cases, virtual network can be dynamically created based on the request from the customer with the given SLA attribute to satisfy customer's objective. And the virtual network dynamic operation, basically, this is virtual network can be further modified and deleted based on customer request dynamically. And customer can further act upon the virtual network resource to perform end-to-end tunnel management, setup, release, modify. And we kind of elaborated that virtual network can be viewed as end-to-end tunnel, as a VN member, composite of VN members for that virtual network. Or if customer wants to look at, it can be a little bit more details than just end-to-end tunnel view. So we kind of define here, I don't want to go through detail, but I appreciate the working group to take a look at this definition if it makes sense to you. So I think next step, we believe that IETF requirement has been stable because it's just a information repository from all the use cases, and then we kind of generalize it to come up with top 12 requirements, which has been fulfilled in the various ICTN documents. For ICTN framework, we believe that it's quite stable, but we have not had any reviewers to critically review that. So we appreciate working group to review this framework document as well.
Adrian Farrell, sorry. At the last meeting, I promised to do a terminology review for alignment with the interconnected TE, and I didn't. I did start it, and I've got a version somewhere on my laptop which has edited at least the abstract, but that's not so useful to you. So it probably needs doing, and I will try to do it, and I hope that the chairs don't block any work just because I'm crap.
Okay. There were definitely some changes in terminology. Getting the terminology stable and correct and consistent is really important. there was actually some old comments going back 2 or 3 IETFs ago that got put on hold until the terminology was resolved, because I know that it wasn't clear whether we were arguing real points or just arguing terminology. So it seems that it would be good, one, for the working group, including Adrian, but not only Adrian, to take a look at the terminology that is in the 2 documents right now, make sure that it makes sense to you and makes sense in the context of the RFCs we already have in the working group. And then whether you agree or disagree, then go dig up your old comments on the draft and see if they still apply. I think this holds for multiple people. Adrian said that he's going to try to take a review. I will also do the same. It would be good if others join in. These are the foundation for this work, for the ACTN work. So if it's wrong now or you disagree with it now, it's just going to get worse as we do more work. Your disagreement's going to get worse and it's going to be harder to fix. So please, now is the time to really do a good review of these documents and particularly the terminology.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good morning. My name is Sergio Belotti.
I think you have to lean in a little to the mic. Just get closer to the mic.
Good morning. My name is Sergio Belotti. I'm going to present the update of the information model for the SCTN. Okay, we made some update with respect to version 4. In particular, like explained also by Yang Li before, we try to make some work on all the bunch of SCTN drafts, try to make an alignment among them, and fix some point that have been provided as feedback from last meeting. So we try to align among drafts in the SCTN and also introduce some alignment with respect to FC 7926. From in the draft, major effort have been put in the object refinement inside the document. So with the introducing of virtual network object function and virtual network computed path list. Then we refine the mapping between primitives and objects, not changing the primitives. And again, we still have attention of the compatibility and also some feedback outcome from other SDO information model. Okay, this is the primitives that are not changed from the last version. And here there is the list of objects with the introduction of the virtual network object function that is going to apply to any virtual network member, so the end-to-end tunnel that is one of the view of virtual network as explained before by Yang. And we refer of RFC 5541 for explicit parameters and attributes for objective function. Then we introduce the virtual network computed path. So this is a list path obtained after a virtual network path computation request. And this is the mapping between the primitives with object and the introduction, again, here, for example, the modify, but also in the instantiation virtual network of the new object of the virtual network object function. And for the virtual network path compute request, we introduce again for the replay on the path computation, the virtual network computed path with the list of path as required. Next step, so the authors believe that now the major point regarding alignment and other topics, for example, some object that was missing in the last version are fixed, but obviously after the feedback before, the inspection, let me say, of the terminology issue has to be enlarged to all the bunch of the drafts. So we are aligned on the other work. And exploiting of this information model in the CTN is already started solution drafts with a CTN virtual network young model for SMI and for the PC applicability for CTN.
Questions, comments? So in looking at it, it seemed like there was a bit of the information in this draft that's repeated in others. Not going to say where it came from and who copied. It doesn't really matter. It's the same author set. But does it really make sense to have the same information repeated in multiple documents? Generally, we don't consider that a good idea. Do you feel like there's repeated information?
Inside the info with respect to the other CTN drafts?
Yeah.
Okay, yes, there is a terminology reference that is repeated. But okay, at the moment are there because the work has been done, try to fix and try to align that. Then we can also decide that the definition are only in the framework and then we point it out to the framework. No problem there.
Once we get done with the other documents, how much of this document's going to be left? Do you think there's going to be enough here to be useful for it to be a working group product? Or is this just something we'll bring into the working group and it'll help us deliver the other documents and then we may not ever really publish this? What do you think? This doesn't go to the question of a working group document or not. This goes to the question of whether we ever publish at the end.
Sorry, this is Young. This one is a info model based on RBNF from the requirement and use cases, and this is standalone, independent of other HTTP document framework requirement. This is ways to before you work on Young model, we kind of specify what are the primitive and objective that needs to go on. So this is pure IETF style RBNF info model, which I believe a standalone in itself.
Okay. Daniele, two things. The first one is on the duplication of information. I totally agree with you that there shouldn't be any duplication of information in two RFCs, but this is an individual document. I mean, it saves some time going around and looking for whatever is here and there. But I agree with you that if we progress the document, we need to remove the duplications. And the second,
information related things.
Right. The second comment I can't tell you.
And the second was the information model. Actually, this I would say that this is the information model that mostly applies to the CMI. where we don't have any solution yet. So if you manage to go through the entire, let me say, process, for the MPI, we did an applicability because most of the solutions are already there. So it's just applicability. In the CMI, many more things are missing. That's why we went for the correct full process, which foresees an information model and then a data model.
So
This is why, in my opinion, even if we remove everything that is duplicated in the document, there is still enough meat for a document.
So when we do go through the process and have all these solution documents put in place, you still see merit in having this go the whole 9 yards?
Yeah, I think the feedback is that anyway, this draft represent the base from the implication in the young model, because this is the RBNF structure and the information that we foreseen they needed to explicitly say in young or in PSAP, because the applicability are for both protocols. So.
How many people think that this is useful work for the working group? That's a reasonable number. How many people have read this draft? About the same. Maybe a little more, but not significant. How many people think that this draft would be a useful foundation for our work in this area? About the same also. Great, thank you. Useful input. We will talk and then go from there. We, being the chairs, will talk and go from there. Thank you.
Okay, this is a kind of little bit different document. We can argue whether this is a document that is just useful but not to be progressed or not. This is one of the questions at the end of the presentation. So abstraction. We tried to do things better this time. We took what is existing, RFC 7626. And where the definition of abstraction is provided. So it's the process of applying policies to the available T information within a domain, and it does not necessarily offer all possible connectivity options. What does it mean in an ICTN hierarchy? Well, in the ICTN hierarchy, abstraction is applied in the two different interfaces, the MPI and the CMI. At this document is mostly focused on the MPI layer, so the interface between the MDSC and the PNC. While it's again applicable in the CMI interface, but there we already have the virtual network, which is itself an abstraction, a kind of abstraction. What are the factors that impact the level of abstraction, how abstraction is done? First one is the nature of the underlying domain. It is possible to have packet domains, optical domains, TDM domains. Different domains need different levels of abstractions in order to allow for the path computation to be done at the different levels of the hierarchy. PNC capabilities. We might have a PNC which is a pure route reflector, and all the path computation is demanded to the MDSC. In this case, there is no abstraction at all. Or there can be different abstraction algorithms running at the PNC level, providing different levels of abstraction. Or there can be mechanisms of path computation request and reply between the MDSC and the PNC. In this case, there is a sort of a master-slave relationship, and the MDSC builds the topology, the needed topology, asking the PNC for what it's interested in. The same applies, obviously, to the capabilities of the MDSC. And the last but not least, the scalability and the frequency of the updates. It is possible to have an ACTN hierarchy that spans tens of domains. In this case, the level of abstraction becomes important, because if the whole topology is flooded to the MDSC, we are going to kill it. On the other side, if we heavily rely on a path computation request and reply, we might kill the DCN. So a good design is always important. Abstraction levels. From the left to the right, we go from 0 to 100%, where 0 is no abstraction at all. We call it white topology. It's basically the entire topology is exported from the PNC to the MDSC as it is learned from the nodes. So it could be the one learned by IGP, BGP, or whatever. Total abstraction, meaning the whole domain is summarized as a single node. There is no information at all but the links that get to that node. We will see that there is one issue to be discussed in the next slide. And in between, there are a number of shades of gray, which we call gray topology. Let's start with the white. I've already spoken about this, but just to summarize, the PNC here provides the actual network topology. There is no filtering, no hiding, and so on. The MDSC, in this case, has the full knowledge of the underlying network topology and is able to do end-to-end detailed path computation. The opposite, the black topology. There are two different ways of summarizing it, depending on what you wanted to do in that domain. In the right one, you see that we just have a single abstract node with information regarding the links that get to that node. In the other one, you have the links to get to that node, but also the border nodes of that domain. This is something that could be useful for the upper layers, because you might need to build tunnels going through that domain, but you might want to build services that either start or end on nodes of that domain. In that case, the information regarding the nodes is mandatory. Suppose that those are P nodes where C nodes are attached, and you wanted to set up a VPN on top. And then the gray topology. There are two different, let me say, problems to be addressed. The first one is the type. We define the gray topology type A and B. Not a huge difference between them, but basically type A is providing a full mesh of connectivity with characteristics, like, for example, delay, available bandwidth, metrics, and so on between the nodes. The second one is not a full mesh, but something that is either configured or agreed with between the customer and provider, and so on. The second issue is how to build the gray topology. It could be possible to have an automatic generation of the gray topology based on any kind of algorithm or any kind of agreement between the customer and the provider, or something that is more related to the discussion that is going on in these days on the whole mailing list of the routing area, which is a path computation request and reply between the MDSC and the PNC. Requirements. This is, this is something interesting, but it's pretty well defined in the draft. So I encourage you to read this part. There is also a pretty good analysis of the different requirements applied to the different types of technology. But let's go to the next, to the final, let me say, conclusions and open points. So, 4 different issues are addressed in this draft, which are factors that affect the abstraction. We have seen them. abstraction methods, how to build the topology, gray, white, and black, requirements that may impact the data model and the protocol design. Now, two questions. The first one is, anything missing about abstraction in the document that is worth considering? The second one, is this a useful kind of work? Maybe everything is clear to everyone, we are all on the same page and we don't need to work on this. Maybe not. Comments? Next, please.
Hi, Adrian Farrell. Daniele, I find most of this useful. I'm struggling with the abstract node with border nodes, because it seems, it's like, is it a node or is it a collection of nodes? And what does it mean to have a node with nodes on the edges of it? Do you mean actually an abstract node with ports, or do you mean an abstract, or do you mean a full mesh of border nodes?
Yours is a good point. Probably a single abstract node is not the right terminology. From a user, a requirement perspective, what I would be able to do as an MDSC is to be able to ask the PNC to set up a tunnel in that domain, and I wanted to be able to ask the PNC to set up a service, or go directly to the nodes and set up a service. If I wanted to set up a service, I needed to know which are the nodes, at least the nodes in that domain. Otherwise, how can I say I want a VPN using those two PE nodes if I'm not aware about the PE nodes? But I agree with you that probably abstract node, single virtual abstract node is not the right terminology. Maybe we could define something more like black 1 and black 2, something like that. I don't know.
Hi, Daniele. That's like we got misconnection. We wanted to actually change the name of the section. That black topology, remove the abstract node. We'll not call it abstract node. It's black because we are still hiding everything internal to the domain. The border nodes are still known. So either one node with only the links coming in, or border nodes with no information within. Also, we also talked about a single node which has a connectivity matrix. That will not belong in the black case. That will go back into the gray topology.
Let's say dark gray and black.
By the way, that was proof.
So can you just go to this slide where we get to that topology, that one? No.
This one?
No, the other one. This one. Oh,
too fast.
This one, yeah. So some years ago, we had experience by interoperability using, where one vendor was using that abstraction. And he was a little bit sad because nobody wanted to use his domain to let traffic pass. And if you look at it from a router perspective,
I'm sorry, which one?
The left one.
Left one.
So since there is no connectivity between the border nodes, there is no way anybody can even route traffic across that kind of blob. So nobody's going to use it.
Mm-hmm. Actually, yeah, please.
So
finish and,
I would suggest to think about the model twice before trying to reintroduce it.
Yeah, well, actually, there is a starting point in the sense that with that information, the MDSC is not able to route traffic from one of those nodes to the others, but is able to it has all the information needed to properly ask the PNC to provide the connectivity. So you can say it starts with black and it is colored going on, something like that. But I agree with you. That's the starting point. You don't operate the network with that piece of information only.
Dhruv, maybe a different point of view, but from the PC's point of view, when we used to have RFC 605 from Adrian, we assumed that this was our starting point, and we were using path computation request and reply to still make this work. So it is still possible to work, but you have to rely on request and reply a lot more. And when you have an abstract topology, you can do path computation. So I think both exist and both are still usable.
You're replying to Gert, not to me.
Dieter Bella, Nokia. I would like to emphasize what Gert has just said. I think for the left abstraction, you need some links that interconnect these border nodes. And also for the right abstraction, you need some connectivity information. So you need to know, well, what that abstract node, what the connectivity is, the potential connectivity between the links. Otherwise, path computation will fail.
Yes,
Well,
but
path computation may not fail if it assumes that there is full connectivity, but if it's not, then of course you cannot set up the LSP.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but you are assuming that the path computation is done by the MDSC, but this is not the case, because this means providing the MDSC with the information needed to properly ask for the path computation to the PNC.
Yeah.
So I agree with that. You cannot. The MDSC cannot do path computation with this information, but with this information, you can ask the PNC to do path computation.
Yeah, this is Young. Yeah, that's exactly the point that we have section building topology. This is not sufficient. It justifies path compute and reply. So that's actually what I think Italo and other folks try to make the point, right? So this actually tells that we need further inquiry to the network. So I think also Drew made that point. I think, is that clear? Yeah, in itself may not be very useful, but it's the one form, and then this justifies path compute and request. Agree, right? Okay.
So just remind me, what exactly was the problem we are going to solve? I mean, do we want to do path computation now or not?
The problem that the draft wants to solve is to find a common agreement among all of us, and I'm more and more convinced that this is needed.
Well, just to give a little bit of flavor, I kind of agree that it would be nice to have something talking about abstraction. But to me, at least, abstraction has to serve a purpose. So saying we can abstract this way or that way and you find another way doesn't really help. The question is, if this is your purpose, think about abstracting it that way. If this is your purpose, think about abstracting this way. So just saying, okay, these are different ways of abstracting, I think it's kind of trivial. It's more about linking the abstraction with the purpose. That would really make a difference.
Mm-hmm.
So from my standpoint, I sort of view the document as cataloging possibilities, not necessarily saying any is what the working group is going to deliver on. And
Yeah.
so I view it as it's a nice conversation piece. It helps get the discussions going. And from that standpoint, it's a useful thing to help get people talking and understanding how you might use the different mechanisms that we have and where we're going. One point I would like to make is you are introducing some new terms. I do like how we've gone from black links now to black networks. That's pretty cool. But if we're going to do that in a sort of informational catalog document, isn't the right place to bring new terminology in. And that sort of ties back to what we were talking about in there.
Actually, black and white topology is already defined in the framework. That's one of the issues of the framework.
Maybe if it is, and I don't remember it there, and I certainly don't remember black network. Okay, back to the
Okay, Loa Anderson. I just was thinking about what Dieter said before, that you need some information of the connectivity within the abstract node. That is actually true even if the node were physical. All nodes, you could actually treat a node so it's actually blocking for some. So you need to have that information both here and in the physical node. So it's the same thing.
Yeah, but I totally agree with that. The black topology means these are the nodes. Make me any question you want regarding those nodes. I'm not telling you the connectivity, but I give you the information for you to ask me the connectivity.
Adrian Farrell, yeah, I think what Loa said, we have already done work on limited cross-connect capability of switches, and a virtual node is a virtual switch with limited cross-connect capability, so we can cover all that. I'm really nervous about some of the terminology as well, and if you go back to whatever it is, 7926, and look at the discussion there, trying to resolve the issue of abstract node, which I understand other SDOs use freely. Abstract node has a very specific meaning in RSVP-TE, and you might want to perhaps use virtual node as we did in 7.
Forget about abstract node here. Yes.
It's now black, yeah. Also, though, that RFC does talk about some of the dangers of node abstraction and some of the limits that creates, and some of the failures you will have trying to operate your network with abstract nodes or virtual nodes or whatever nodes.
I think Adrian brings up a good point here. Is in discussion and conversation, we can be loose about our terms. When we start getting down to the documents, it's very important to be aligned with where we've been, and getting aligned with the interconnected TE document is really important.
The document doesn't say it's better to do white, black, gray. It's
no,
a
I'm talking
terminal.
about, I'm talking about the virtual versus abstract.
It's a menu.
Yeah, but some of the terminology, it'd be good to get the right terminology right.
Yes, Italo Busi, just a quick comment. I think it's very useful to have this type of work, not only to show all the options, but also what are the implications in terms of what do you need, like you need pack computation, maybe not because you provide all the information. So I think when I talk with people, everybody has in mind different idea, different underlying assumption of what is the abstraction they are thinking of, and then you don't easily understand what you need because you think one abstraction, he thinks another abstraction, and you say, I need this, no, you don't. So I think it's very useful to have some reference to say, I'm thinking about abstraction in this context, and in this context, you need this capability, and maybe in another context, you don't. So I think it's useful to work on this. Thank you.
Just one clarification.
Name, please.
Is it topology?
Name, please.
I'm sorry?
Your name, please.
I'm GQ. Okay. GQ from Huawei. So.
Thank you.
Okay. GQ1. Is the topology is informational entity?
I'm sorry. Is the topology?
The topology here.
Yes.
Is that an informational entity?
Is the information? I don't get your question. I'm sorry.
Okay. I don't understand the circle here.
The circle is the domain.
Topology is a topology or abstraction of a topology. My question is a topology a informational entity?
The circle is the domain. So everything that is under the control of one PNC. Because we are speaking about the information that is propagated from the PNC to the MDSC. So in one case, the PNC says, for example, on the left, I control a domain that is composed by nodes A, B, and C, 3 nodes. I'm not telling you the connectivity between those nodes. You ask me, and we will discuss about it later. And I'm telling you that those 3 nodes has these links towards other domains.
So you have an informational model to describe topology.
You have an information model. Actually, yes. With the T topology model, you can already do that.
Okay. So with that, you've actually put us back on schedule. Thank you. And we're going to move on to the next presentation.
Who has the blue sheets? Has everybody signed it?
Yeah, this is another informational draft that we try to, have people understand where ACTN, the young models fit in with other service area definition of young models, so that we would have a big picture. Because we are talking about multiple interfaces, and without this kind of reference model, I think people, get lost. So we try to attempt explain how the different type of young models defined in operations and the management area, and also in the routing area, applicable to the ACTN framework and interfaces. So that we kind of show that how ACTN architecture can be satisfied using various Yang models. So this is kind of a sister document for PSAP applicability of ACTN. I think Drew published that and shared in PC working group. And this is another companion draft that talks about how Yang model can fulfill ACTN architecture and interfaces. So I think we are going to have a mapping between all those various models, and also want to discuss some specific data models that are under development, as well as highlight, what are the gaps. Some certain functions may have not been fulfilled because this is work in progress. So we try to give the reader of this document a big picture of ACTN scope. This is service Yang model reference this draft in OPS AWG working group. It tries to define various hierarchy, starting from customer all the way down to network element. What are the Yang models basically? As you see, do we have a light here? Pointer? No?
Yes, I saw it.
You saw it? Okay. Okay. I can see. I'm sorry.
Just don't point at me.
Yeah, I think between customer and service orchestrator, I think it's called customer service model, which means a customer service model is used to describe a service as an offer or delivered to to customer by the network operator. So that's the definition used in that draft. And then after you have a service orchestrator, you have a network orchestrator. You may have multiple. They call that interface service delivery model. Basically, service delivered by a service orchestrator to define and configure how service is provided by the networks. And then network orchestrator to controller is called a network configuration model. Basically, it's used by a network orchestrator to provide network level configuration model through mapping. So it can be technology specific or technology agnostic, but it has to be understood by the networks. And then we have various controllers down there, domain controllers, and then device configuration model that is used by controller to configure physical network elements. So these are the classification of the reference, the draft. And then we try to map how does that fit with ACTN architecture. As you see here, this is MDSC has actually a service coordination function as well as network mapping function. The simplified version of ACTN model, service orchestrator and the network orchestrator is provided by MDSC, simple, the basic model. So as you see, a customer service model corresponds to CMI, and network configuration model corresponds to MPI, and device configuration model SBI. But this is another the point. Actually, when we published this document, one operator said they want to decouple service orchestration from network orchestration. So actually, ACTN architecture allows a hierarchy of MDSs. So in such case, one MDS on the top is kind of service orchestrator, and then one MDS down is a network orchestrator. So I try to illustrate that this model is very consistent. ACTN model is very consistent with the service Yang model in IETF. Okay, so this is kind of put the repository of what other what Yang models so far have reference. For instance, we talked about a lot of configuration, scheduling, path computation, tunnel provisioning, topology abstraction, technology specific topology abstraction, and also tunnel provisioning for technology specific. They, by and large, they are MPI basically. But CMI, I think transport service model and the virtual network Yang model, which Drew will present next, And also, VN Pass Compute API, they can also classify as a service CMI to be fulfilled to basically service can be requested in various way, so that the network can intercept that and then try to create tunnels for that service, and so on. So this is not exhaustive list. There are a lot of work to be done, I think, even on MPI and CMI, but this is just a mapping, an attempt to map existing proposal to where they fit in ACTN architecture and interfaces. Okay, so I think next step, I think if you think that this is kind of useful effort, we can continue, keep updating with the development of various young models that have not been discussed, like telemetry and policy and different kinds of service models, and also some specific things, the IP optical integration case. We can make a little bit more models to be developed. So use this document as a guideline to understand how various young models fit into ACTN scenario as a solution. So, just want to ask you a question. Is that useful attempt to, you may disagree certain model fit where, but we can discuss that point, but I just want to ask if this is a useful thing for this working group.
Jeff and Sarah, I think it's very useful work. There's huge confusion about how models at different levels should be used, and perhaps we don't want to see Kandinsky's NSQ network. Someone really has to work out use cases. How do we mount service model for L3 VPN below, I don't know, TLSP and below optical layer? There are no examples, and people don't really understand how to use it. So I think it's extremely useful.
Thank you.
So, Giacomo, before asking a question, I got a little bit confused when I was reading the draft, whether this was an attempt to have this kind of model for a layer kind of thing. So when you think about packet and optical, so is this, let's say, an optical controller on an optical network orchestrator or an optical service orchestrator or an optical customer?
Mm-hmm.
Or is it a mix of saying, okay, I have an Ethernet VPN customer, and I have some optical customer.
Mm-hmm.
How do those two blend together? Is it the same controller? Do they have different?
That's actually a very good question. I think a lot of operators saying that our TE model in the our topology and TE, they are very good work in itself. However, how that fit into their service offering. So as you're saying, it can be a layer 3 VPN and optical, how it interacts, right? And that's one example. And we have a lot of questions how layer 3 VPN, for instance, can fit into this model. And they want to know how each IP controller and the optical controller would interact in this architecture frame. What are the service parameters that need to be passed on MPI? What is not there? So I think we try to correlate those relationship with this document, as you're saying, but we have not started details because we don't know whether it would be a good idea for the working group. And if, as Jeff said, it's a good idea and then put some use cases, then definitely we're going to develop further for certain cases. So is that answering your question?
Yeah, I would definitely suggest you to take a look at it and ask your question. Is it strictly, let's say, a kind of technology-specific kind of thing, or you want to have different hierarchies for different technologies?
Yes.
And how to merge them?
Mm-hmm.
So that's not really clear at this point in time.
Okay, that's good.
Okay. Other comments? Okay. So it's interesting that the left-hand side of this and the right-hand side are pretty much the same, but they have different names.
Yes, the reason is it's a different area in IETF. That's why we try to match up.
I think the matching is actually very helpful. I think it's helpful to do the matching. And if I'm not, you guys actually have been doing ACTN a while, and some of these you may predate or coincidentally invented the terminology. But I'd say that the rest of the industry, I think, understands the left-hand side a little bit, the left-hand side terminology more than the right-hand side terminology. And, sometimes it's okay to use other people's terminology. So I think going forward, we should be thinking about whether or not we should jump on the bandwagon that everyone else has on the left-hand side or not, or continue down a path that maybe it makes it harder for people to understand what we're doing.
Yeah, I don't know what to say. I don't have.
I'm not coming with an answer either. I'm asking a question.
Yes, I think the industry use different terminologies. As you know, if you look,
yeah, absolutely.
ONF or even customer, they have their own name. So that's why in AC10 framework we try to define what functions that each controller type plays. That's, I think, so. And this is a descriptive of that. So I don't think we are really contradicting. But this name has been used, is accepted as a framework in this working group, and this one is actually individual draft yet.
So the notion of service models is pretty well entrenched right now in the IETF. We have a L3 SM group, we have an L2 SM group. I'm waiting for the L1 SM proposal probably, and I don't know which group, if it's this one, CCamp, it'll be in this area. I'm sure we'll have it soon. Do we want to align, make it easy for other people in other areas of the IETF to understand what we're doing by using their terminology, or do we want to try to promote our terminology outside? And it's a question for the group. I'm not, and I think discussion and thinking about it primarily on the list rather than in the room would be good, but I think I've just opened the floodgates, so I see 3 people coming to the mic. Go ahead. No, you can go to the mic, please. Reaction from the group is no different than my comment right now, so it's good. Or my comment has no more weight than yours.
So I think creating functional description and then map all the names to them. So when you write code, actually you can call right entity would be extremely useful, because again, there's soup of terminology, and creating clarity would be really great by defining what it does functionally and then mapping all different names being either controller, PNC, or whatever you call it.
Daniele, actually, your comment is good. My answer is that this mapping is not necessarily one-to-one, in the sense that in this context, the PNC maps with the controller, the MDSC maps with the network orchestration, but often the PNC is just as just a subset of the functionality of the controller. The MDSC is just a subset of the functionality of the network controller, and so on. So I would say that the PNC is one of the functionalities of the controller inside the controller. The MDSC is one of the functionalities inside the network orchestrator. This is why we defined this different terminology, because the mapping is not one-to-one. Not necessarily.
Adding that description to the framework might be very helpful.
I'm sorry?
Adding that description of what you just said might be very useful in the framework.
Again, I think it was there, but this time I'm not that sure.
Okay, that's fair. Yep.
Okay, Hao Mian from Huawei. A good point to propose the align the terminology, but currently I'm not pretty sure on how stable and mature for the left-hand side, but I think we keep using the name for the ACTN term for a while, and it's good to understand each other first, and we can do the determine later. But my point is, we only need to change the terminology if and only if the 2 terms are exactly the same. But sometimes I don't think it's a 100% match.
I suspect that if I took a poll in the IETF of how many people have heard of orchestrators and controllers, that we would see a huge number of hands go up. If I asked the same question about MDSC and PNC, I'm sure I would see far fewer. So whether or not one is a older term in terms of where the industry has gone, the left-hand side is certainly the more accepted terminology. I agree that there's a lot of people will have different meaning to those exact words. So I'm not saying it adds clarity,
Okay.
but in terms of your point that one term is generally accepted and the other one's not, I think you have it backwards. Okay, so we're going to move on to the next. Thank you. Good talk.
So, hi, this is Dhruv, and this is the CMI Yang model, what we just discussed, what Yang was talking about. So we'll just show you like what we were thinking, why we need this Yang, what are the things that we are putting in this Yang, and how does the CMI look. So basically, I don't think so we need to recap, because this is just to tie in with the rest of the story that you have heard on the previous presentations. So we are talking about the Yang model at the CMI. It is aligned to the info model and where we talked about the VN views, that we may have an end-to-end tunnel view, which is VN member, as well as we can have an abstract topology. So multiple VN views are supported. In the framework document, we also have access point. So we do talk about that, how those access point are told to our customer in this CMI model. And the role of the MDSC, basically, as we just talked about, is to convert the model that we receive from the top to the model for our PNC, which is the work which is already being done in the T's working group, which is the T tunnel model, T topology model, and sending it to the PNC to actually work on. So we will talk about what the model on the top should look like, and the operations that we are assigning or doing on this model are VN compute, VN instantiate, you modify, you delete, as well as do the generic life cycle management of your VN. So this was presented, I think, in the last Yang joint session by Yang. So the updates that we have done now is aligned it with our info model much more. All the things that we have assigned in the info model are present. So for example, the ability to compute path before instantiating it, which is the VN compute. So this has been added in form of an RPC. We also, from the requirement documents, we have had a requirement for multi-source, multi-destination, which is different from P2MP and MP to MP, where the idea here is that the customer may say that any of these source or any of these destinations are okay with me. You pick based on the network conditions, which is the best one. And if something goes wrong, you are allowed to choose a different after consulting with me. So we support this in our Yang model now, which is the multi-source and multi-destination. Also we added reference to abstract topology. When the VN view is abstract topology, of course, we don't want to write that in this model. We already have an abstract topology model. So you simply can maintain a reference to the T topology model and show to the customer the abstract topology from there. Similarly, if the customer wants to know about the tunnel states, he can refer to the T tunnel model, which is maintained at MDSC anyway. And this reference can be provided, and it could be useful for the customer in case customer wants to know more details about the VN. We also support for object functions and metric as per the info model. So let me just go through the one by one. So the first was pre-instantiation, where we have added an RPC, VN compute, which takes in input the APs, which is the source and destinations, which are referenced to the access point. And you took objective functions, metric, bandwidth, all the properties that we want to expose to our customer. And the output would be in form of a VN with multiple VN views supported. So this is the RPCs that we have added for pre-computation, which is VN compute. This is multi-source and multi-destination. So when we configure our source and destinations, we can put a flag whether this is a part of the multi-source or multi-destination group. And once in the state, which is the selected among them, would be referred in the VN member list. So that's how we are handling the multi-source, multi-destination in this Yang. We also added the objective functions. So this objective functions we are borrowing from PSAP. This we will align with these once we need to have discussions about where is the right place for objective functions, whether it is PSAP or TE, whichever way it ends up, we can take care of it. Here also it's not defined in this model, but right now we are borrowing it from PSAP. The other thing is the different types of metric. Again, it could be limit or it could be optimized. So those informations are put here. And this is just a list of the kind of metrics that the customer cares about. And then the bandwidth and other policy information. As I said, we are also maintaining a reference to the tunnel model. So in case customer cares about finding out this VN member, what is the tunnel, and I want to know the actual tunnel state and the tunnel properties as instantiated, he can go to the tunnel model, the reference is provided, which could be useful for some kind of customers which want to know more details about the tunnels. Similarly, in case the VN view is abstract topology and they want to look at the actual topology provided, that can be instantiated in the T topology draft, and a reference to that is maintained in the VN Yang. So that covers all the updates that we have done in this document. We have tried to align with all the other ACTN documents as well as the info model. And main question here we would have is that based on what Yang just, there's going to be a lot of confusion between Yang and Yang. But the main question is that whether this VN Yang model that we are proposing at CMI, is it useful? And is this a good base for doing that? Any questions?
There's silence because people have no questions or they haven't really looked at the document. How many people have read this document? This is just a few. Actually, it's a reasonable number. More hands went up slowly. Have you thought about the relationship of this document with L3SM and L2SM?
Yes, but it is not yet documented here. But yes, we have talked about it. So idea there being, like as in the previous discussion we did, when we talked, the customer may just want to create an L3 VPN. He may use the L3SM model. And from the L3SM model, what are the QoS they want? We need to translate that QoS into this VN model. And that can be done not by an actual customer, but by the service orchestrator. So when your service orchestrator and the guy who's managing your VN is two different entities, you can, the L3SM receiver can translate that this is the traffic engineering tunnels that I would like to establish for my VPN to be successful. Pass on that information to this model. I will do that, as well as the view, because sometimes it's not just the endpoints, but the internal details about how my VPN is being provisioned in the service provider network. That information, how my tunnels are behaving, can be viewed from the state model. So both the config and state of this model could be useful, and it works well with L3SM, L2SM. What we were also thinking is that we may start writing a mapping model that who's using this ACT and VN, because right now we have L3SM, later on we'll start working on L2SM, and other people may start using it. So what we want to do is we want to maintain a mapping between this is the VN that I have created, which is stored in this Yang model, and this L3SM is actually going to use it, or this L2SM is using. So we can have this mapping, which is the job of, as the Yang presented in this, the service coordinator job.
For me, it'd be useful to see that written down. It's good that you have thinking about it, and it would be helpful to see that documented.
Definitely.
But we have a few more people here.
So to my memory, L3SM provides single call to request T related information. So we need to make sure that XSM, so L2, L3, or L8 SM will request traffic engineering in exactly the same way, so API match. I think this would be the most important part.
Yeah. Agree.
We do it just once for any kind of overlay on top of physical topology.
Agree.
And that was Jeff Kansora.
Xifeng from Quadro. Do have a question of what's the relationship between this model and the T topology model?
So currently the thing that we are doing is that as we said that there are two types of VN views. You can either be interested only by knowing what are my end-to-end tunnels, or I would like to get the abstract topology. So if I am showing an abstract topology to my end customer, all you have to do, you will still use the, where is it? Yeah, you will still use the TE topology model, but I can maintain a reference that if you want to get the view, so I'm not going to ever store node and links in this model. That will always belong to the topology model, but I will maintain a reference so that you can map that for this particular VN, this is the abstract topology, and you can go to the T topology model to fetch it.
So based on the structure, it looks to me that this model, it is a subset of the topology model can do. So now I have this question. So this seems like a simplified view of another model. So the question is, when we want to have a model which is a simplified version of another model, what we should do? We should simply build another model, or we should have some way to build the relationship between them and create a view of that.
The how I view this is that what is the aim? Our aim is that we provide one simple Yang model for our end customer to do all operations related to VN. And one of those operations is the topology. So of course, we don't want to copy everything which is there in the topology. If I would have added nodes and links and other information in this model, then I would have agreed with your question. But all this model is doing, you still have to use abstract topology model if you want abstract topology. But I will provide you a simple interface so that you can start linking information from one model to another. So here is your, this is what you wanted, which is the VN config. This is the abstract topology that you are getting, which is right now stored here.
But remember, the topology model can also provide an abstract node, which can also be mapped to the virtual network. If you map them to a single node, you have connection and connectivity between them, then you have this model.
So this is actually really interesting discussion, and I really hate to cut it off.
Sure.
But we're actually 7 minutes over. One last thing on that, we've had the same problem exist in, let's say, L3SM for CEPE provisioning. It's exactly the same problem. And perhaps what we're really talking about here is we're looking at a TE service model. Whether it's right to do it with the right term, with these terms, or look at augmenting the L3 models with TE capability. These are questions we have to look at, but that's, I think, really what we're after is that this is a TE service model, the beginnings of one. It's great to be chair because you get to say the last word on the topic, but we got to move to the next one. And we're going to ask to try to go a little bit faster to catch up time. Thank you. No, sorry.
That's not the one.
That's not it.
Sorry.
What number is it?
The PDF. It's 10. This one here. This. Yeah.
Okay. Hello, everybody. This is Hamia from Huawei. I'm going to introduce the new draft talking about the interrupt test between ACT and controllers. And this is a joint work with a lot of companies, and we just list their name here. And we did a lot of offline work and just summarize the test cases into this draft. So as we have already talked a lot about the ACTN stuff, so this time I'm going to skip the background and start from the introduction of the test only. And in this test, we only focus on the MPI of ACTN to do the interrupt between this controller and the lower level controller PNC. And this test is also based on emulators from different parties, including the IP network and the transport network. So We have quite a few operators with us to discuss the scenario and the models we are going to test and we are going to use, and we have different vendors to do their own implementation on both the controllers and together with the emulation of their device. So I think that the southbound interface, which is here, is domain specific or technology specific. We do not force people to do any stuff, but the only thing we focus on here is MPI. And on MPI, we are planning to do two different protocols. Like one is RESTconf plus IETF young models, and the other is PCE protocol. So we hope that multi-layer, multi-domain, and multi-protocol can be supported in this test. So there are a few related works besides ACTN work. There are also young model works and the PCE protocol work. And we have also defined 4 different test cases in this draft. And the first one is highly related with topology abstraction, which is the basic function of the hierarchical controllers. So each PNC need to prepare its respective TE database, and maybe there can be a kind of abstracted algorithm. But the key is to report it via this interface by using either RESTconf get message. Sorry, it's not a get message. Get should be sent from MDSC to PNC. It's to report from the on the MPI using the T topology model, and for RS to use the RS report message to report the topology. We deployed a hackathon last weekend about testing about this function, and we did find some problem with notification. But actually, I talked with Shifeng yesterday, and I found that notification mismatch will be updated and aligned with the I2RS network topology, maybe already done or in the near future. But I think this one is solved. And the second, given this topology, we are able to deliver some end-to-end service from one side to the other side. I think this is a cross-domain RSP setup. So MDSC firstly need to determine the domain sequence and then send the post message or PC initiate message to each involved PNCs, and each PNC can do their own job. As we have different parties, so we do not limit any implementation style on this step, but each PNC just need to do its own job and give a response to MDSC. After each PNC finishes its job, the RSP is set up successfully. So given the RSP setup, we can do some kind of changing, updating any parameters of this RSP, and we select to choose the bandwidth as it is the most important parameters of a connection. So we try to construct 2 RSPs and adjust the bandwidth and increase one and reduce another one. Looks like a load balance. And finally, we are going to test the interdomain restoration, because we need to simulate a failure on any domain and trying to work it out by the cross domain. So in order to avoid doing an intra-domain restoration, we try to design very special topology to avoid the PNC to handle it by itself. So, well, this is not the final report of this work, but it's a kind of kickoff, and we will continue our job on this kind of test and tweak our implementation according to the latest draft, and the latest result will be published on the ACTN wiki page after this IETF. So we are here to present our work and see whether any people are willing to have interest in this work, and you are welcome to come to us and discuss. We can work together. So that's all for this. Thank you.
Hey, thank you for letting us know about this work. It's always good hearing about things we're working on being tested. it's particularly interesting if you are finding out that there's limitations in what we've done, and if there's needs to fill that and rolling that into the standard.
Dieter Belder, Nokia. I would like to have some clarifications what the intent of this draft is, whether you intend that the IETF is going to organize interoperability events among multiple vendors. And my concern actually is that there's still a lot of Yang modeling, which is work in progress. So I'm not sure whether the Yang models are already mature enough in order to start this work.
Okay, thank you for bringing this to us. Actually, this is one of our problem also, because this is not IETF official interop test, but I hope it's to be. So we discussed the Yang model.
I actually don't know what an official IETF interop test is.
Okay. So as it's not very official, so we need to discuss case by case. So any kind of input are welcome. For example, what do you prefer to use, and what kind of scenario you want to test?
So hearing about interoperability or implementation reports is something that there's a long history of, and those are usually conducted ad hoc and as the people who are working on it decide, sort of like how we get contributions here. We don't force anyone to do it, that we accept it and then decide whether we want to work on it. So it's good to hear it. It's information, it's input. It's nice when we have a Shepherd write-up and people say, there's a statement that says, has anyone implemented it? It's nice to be able to have information that says we implemented it, and it's even better to find out when we have bugs before we publish. So informally, it's good stuff, but it's formally, we don't have a formal process there. All right, so we should move on to the next. And I think we're going to have a remote speaker, and if he's available, Boris, if you're there, I think you have to enter the queue. It's great that you're here. It's funny, our user interface says
hello
you're not,
everyone,
so
this is Boris Hasanov, and today Andrei and I will present a short update about PCECC use case draft. Please, next slide. Shortly, in this version, we covered comments that were given during previous session, and we addressed them. Second important thing, what together with Aijun Wang, we decided to split the work on PC and native IP networks in a separate draft, and Aijun will present it right after me. And last thing, what we added new customer use case about inter-IS traffic engineering, and this case will be presented soon. And finally, a new version was published, and we asked for feedback in the list. Next slide. And now I would like to hand over presentation to my colleague Andrei, and he will describe this use case.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Andrei Elperin. I am head of IP network engineering at Kyivstar, and I want to share some our ideas when and why PCECC can be useful in our network. Next slide, please. Okay, and for the beginning, just a very brief overview of our company, our network. Kyivstar is the largest mobile operator in Ukraine. Kyivstar is the second largest fixed broadband provider in Ukraine. And also we are providing a full set of services for B2B subscribers like mobile services, FMC services, layer 2, layer 3 VPNs, IP transit, and so on. Our network consists of IP MPLS-enabled POPs in more than 100 cities all over Ukraine. And the most important things about this presentation is that our network is operating in inter-IS environment. In 2012, we bought one of our local competitors, since that time, we have done a lot of work to integrate his networks into our infrastructure. But till this time, unfortunately, some part of his network still function separately. I mean, we still have two different domains, different clouds, with different IGPs, different service routers, different access layer in some part of Ukraine. Next slide, please. Okay, to organize traffic flows between two different domains, two different autonomous systems, of course, we need NNIs. But in our case, the number of these NNIs is quite high, because right now we're using 9 different NNIs in different geographical locations all around Ukraine. Why we need so many NNIs? The answer is that layer 2 VPN services is very popular in Ukraine. You know, sometimes I think that it's even more popular than layer 3 VPNs. There are two types of services, of course, it's point-to-point VPN, point-to-multipoint, layer 2 VPN. And the most popular one is point-to-point in our case. And it's so popular that right now we have several thousands of layer 2 VPNs, inter-AS layer 2 VPNs, and much more inter-AS. These inter-AS VPNs are divided into parts, two types. One type is intra-city, and the second type is inter-city. Intra-city is very popular, actually. And for quite a big part of the services, we have two major demands from our subscribers, our customers. The first demand is to minimize round-trip time for the service. And the second demand is to organize some protection for the service. And if you're talking about these two demands, for example, even for intra-city service, it means that, okay, first, traffic must flow through the direct NNI in this city. And the second, this NNI should be protected by NNI as a different city. And actually, that's why we are forced to use so much NNI at that time. And we can't reduce this amount right now, unfortunately. And if you start to thinking about implementation of all this scheme, and if you're thinking about a legacy MPLS signaling, like option B, layer 2 VPNs, it's quite complicated in real life. It's quite complicated to design. Each service quite complicated to provision, and quite complicated to troubleshoot for operation teams. So to be honest, at this time, some part of our NNIs, it's just option A, like pure Ethernet trunks with some VLANs. For example, in this picture, that red VLAN is intra-city VPN and green VLAN is inter-city VPN. And redundancy is implemented sometimes, like pseudo-wire redundancy, even STP in some cases. So yes, we can provide the service, we are providing the service, but actually we are not very happy about the way how we do it. And next slide, please. Okay, yes, okay. So is in this situation, from our point of view, is
and you have 2 to 3 minutes.
Case for PCECC, which can help us. The setup is quite straightforward. There's some PC controller. Of course, there is something on the northbound interface, just not in the slide. So we have a PCAP session from each router to the controller. Also, we have a BGPLS session from set of root reflector from each domain. In that case, okay, PC have a full view of topology from both domains, and it can easily calculate path. And the most important for us, it can program LFIP on each network element without any additional complicated signaling. Okay, next slide, please. So with PCEC, we can easily achieve some goals, like for example, a RED service primary flow through the direct NNI, and backup LSP is going via the shortest alternative path. For example, a RED service is going primary via the shortest path, and the backup LSP is going via the most disjoint path. Okay, and the last thing we need to consider is not in the slide. We are using this approach is service restoration time. Of course, if you are talking about such approaches, there's no additional signaling. The restoration must be done via the centralized controller. And in that case, it's difficult to talk about 50 milliseconds restoration time. But to be honest, we don't need this service restoration time for any of our service. We need some sub-second, but sub-second is possible to achieve a centralized solution. And also, we don't have any plans to use PCEC to control all of our LSP, only for some set for inter-AS LSP. And that's all. Thank you for your attention. So if you have some questions.
Thank you very much. It actually worked quite well with you being remote. So thank you. So this is just one of the use cases in the document. The document covers a number of other use cases. Out of curiosity, how many people have read the document? It's a reasonable number. Do you want to talk now or wait for the next one?
Let's wait.
All right, we're going to ask more. We're going to talk a little bit more about this document together with after the next presentation because they're related. So we're going to go on to the next speaker.
Agent.
Hello.
And we're short on time, so.
No problem. Here I will give a short introduction for our PCIe native IP network. This is the second time to introduce a teacher group. After the last meeting, we have united several co-authors from the different companies from Huawei and Tencent and Juniper to put forward this draft. First, we want to see the overall graph for the traffic engineer in current status. When we talk about traffic engineer, we focus on IP network. There are several situations. The MPLS native IPv6 and native IPv4, and there are current solutions for the distributed deployment and central control, but there are no solution for the native IP network for especially for native IPv4. So this two draft will cover this area. The key idea for PCIe native IP network is basically two concepts. The first is the dual multi BDP session strategy, and the second is the PCIe-based central control. This is the general solution for our proposal.
This is new. This is very specific. Okay.
So in our network, we have received the customer requests that require the end-to-end QoS assurance in the native IP network. So for example, there are different prefix pair, the prefix 11 to prefix 24, and the prefix 14 to prefix 24 requirement different QoS treatment. So first, we can put these different prefix into different BGP different BGP peer. Secondly, the PCE will compute in centrally the path to the different BGP peer, different BGP next hop. And thirdly, the PCE will send every router and path to the express route to the BGP next hop. So we can decouple the prefix and the hop by the dual and multi-BGP strategy. The different BGP peer was built by the different loopbacks. For example, we built the BGP peer 1 with the loopback 1, with BGP peer 2 with loopback 2, and BGP peer N with loopback N. This is our general solution. So based on our solution, we can see two use case for the dynamic allocation of the network resource. The first is if the QoS requirement changed. For example, the prefix 14 and the prefix 24 require the normal QoS link. We can then put this prefix into the BGP peer 1. So the path to the BGP next hop did not change. So we need only change the configuration or action on the R1 and R7. This is the case 1.
3 minutes.
Okay, no problem. In case 2, if the traffic for the different prefix is changed, for example, the traffic from prefix 14 to prefix 24 is changed, and we can assign one new path for the BGP peer 2. So there is no need to change the BGP peers at the R1 and R7. So to fill our solution, we need to some PCAP extension. We propose 3 new PCAP object. The first is the peer address list. The second is peer prefix authorization. The third is X peer route. So when PCC receives this information, they can build a different BGP relationship and advertise the different prefixes so the different BGP peer, and then it can build the expression route to the BGP next hop. So we also compare our solution to our solution to fulfill this requirement. There are BGP flowback and OpenFlow can also finish this, accomplish this task, but they require more state table in the on router. In our solution, there are 2 approaches can finish this task. One is the netconf and YARN, and the other is the PCP extension. But if we use netconf and YARN, there are multiple YARN supported, and the speed and agility of the action, I think is not as quickly as the PCAP. So we propose for PCAP extension. So we have also described some deployment consideration in draft, the scalability. And we think the scalability is same as the BGP L3 VPN solution, and high availability. We can use the PCE as send quarter to keep the high availability, and we can increment deployment in our network because we can update only the congested router and use a similar solution. We can use this solution in the pure IGP network in the similar procedure as they use some route tag or route policy. So for action, we ask is it enough to adopt the WJ draft, and we also will consider the solution for the pure IGP network usage, and the third is the QoS consideration. Do we need to deploy the CoS pairment to the PCAP, to the PCC router. So this is all. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. How many people have read the draft? A few people. So in my reading of the document, there's two things going on here. There's one that is a definition of a new use case, particularly the PCEP for IP traffic engineering, is I think it isn't described anywhere else. So one is a new use case, and then two is a solution for that. So it's really separable piece. And the reason why we delayed the previous conversation on use cases, it seemed it would be good to take out the use case definition from this draft and move it into the prior one, and then to bring it in as the collection in as a working group document. And so we wanted to get the feedback from the authors. Hopefully the remote authors are still online, but you as well, and then the room of whether they think it's a good direction to go. And if we think it's a good direction to go, we'll ask you to do that work of combining them together and then go through the formal process. What do you think?
I think the PCC use case may be consider mainly the LSP environment, MPS environment. So, but maybe the solution is different.
Yeah,
so I think
use cases don't give solutions. Use cases define why you would use something.
But here we just also give the solutions. So I think because this draft also describes the solutions. So
right, I'm not. This draft would continue as a solutions draft.
Okay.
So that we're not saying you stop this draft. This draft would continue as a solutions draft. But the definition of the use case, we're asking about moving into the prior document, into the use case document.
I think it's okay.
That you think that's reasonable.
Dhruv, as an author or a co-author, as a contributor to the previous document, I was just worried that whether using PC for native IP is little controversial. It's not at the par of what we are trying to do with PCCC. So my worry is that by adding this use case, I hope we don't delay the things that is already cooked up. And this thing, which is, even I per se, I'm not 100% sure whether using PC for native IP is a good idea or not. And I disagree with my co-authors there. They feel it is, but I am not so sure.
So you would be, your point is even though it's an informational document, right, that you, by bringing it in, it would delay that work. All right. Well, we can ask a few more comments. And I should comment that we're going to wrap up in about 30 seconds on this topic.
I'll be super quick. We already have a solution to do traffic engineering in IP networks. It's called MPLS.
Fine, then that's a solution to
my point
a
is,
use case. The question is whether or not the use case should be documented right now. The conversation is not on the solution being proposed,
okay,
but whether the use case should be captured in the single use case document.
Okay.
So you don't like the solution, I get that.
I was to the next point.
Yeah, which we're not going to talk about now, by the way.
So scene requirements, full mesh of sessions between PC and PCC, kind of, it looks scary. There are no router reflectors. There's no ability to dissimulate.
So again, a comment on the solution. Can you comment on whether we should combine the use cases?
I would really like to see better comparison to flow spec or BGP-based solutions before we proceed. I mean, the statement that the RIP is going to look the same is incorrect in a way, because every router will end up with only its local state with regard to traffic passing through. So it's not going to be overpopulated BGP RIP.
So to the authors of this group, I will take the reaction of the room to be rejection of the chair's proposal of taking this use case and bringing it into the other document. So we think that it's important, based on that, it would be good to continue your work as a separate document and discussing it as a separate document, and we'll see where it goes. But I'm not sure there's support right now. So we have to talk more.
Okay.
Talking more on the list would be good. There's some questions we didn't address. I'm going to do, while the next person comes up, I'm going to do a quick poll on the previous document. So this is on the use case document that was presented remotely. I had previously asked how many had read the document. There was a good showing of hands. How many think that having a use case, PCC use case document is useful for the working group? It's a reasonable number. If memory serves, it's about the same as who had read it. How many think that the existing document is a good foundation for our work? Any reservations? So about the same numbers, maybe a little less, and 0 reservations. Like the prior poll document, the chairs will talk about it and take it to the list. Thank you. Thank you. We're going to move on to the next.
Just to reinforce what she said, the use case should be completely decoupled from the possible solution. So just because you happen to be co-author of the solution, it shouldn't impose using it, right?
Use case. Right. So the next 2 presentations are good stuff. We're going to give each of them 6 minutes. And just a heads up on the last one, we're going to end up with a poll. So don't leave the room too early.
The next draft on the agenda is titled Recommendations for RSVPT and SR LSP Coexistence. My name is Pawan Biram, and I'm presenting this on behalf of the folks listed on this slide. There are a fair number of operators out there who are slowly but surely moving from using RSVP LSPs to SR LSPs. The migration process can take a while, multiple years in some cases. The point here is SR LSPs and RSVP LSPs must coexist within the same domain, possibly for a fairly long period of time, without causing undue disruption to each other. The base requirement for such a coexistence arrangement to work is to make sure that the placement of SR LSPs doesn't introduce any inaccuracies in the TED that's used by RSVP path computation engines, distributed or otherwise. If an entity that's computing RSVP paths is not aware of the existence of SR LSPs in the network, or in other words, if it's not aware of the actual bandwidth being used on the network TE links, then we obviously have a problem, and that's where this draft comes in. It's an informational document. It discusses the requirements that are associated with this coexistence arrangement, and puts forth some solution options that address this issue of generic dark bandwidth pool management. There are 5 solution proposals in the document. I'll quickly run through them in the next few slides. First up is the simplest of all, static partitioning of bandwidth. The idea here is you would statically partition the reservable bandwidth on a T interface between SR and LSP and mandate each of them to operate within that stipulated amount of bandwidth. It just works for some operators, but the obvious drawback is that you wouldn't be able to efficiently make use of the reservable bandwidth. The next option is centralized management of available capacity. You would introduce a centralized controller to be in charge of path placement for both your RSVP LSPs and SR LSPs. The deterrent, if you will, here is that you would have to, if you already have distributed RSVP TLSPs, distributed control of RSVP TLSPs in your network, you first need to migrate that to centralized control and then introduce SR. And this may not be practical from a migration strategy point of view for some operators. The next option involves flooding SR utilization information in IGPT via the T metric extensions, TLVs, and having the path computation elements take those attributes into account while computing their RSVP paths. This works great. The concern here is that you would need to update your IGPT implementations to support these new TLVs. You need to update your computation logic to take these constraints into account. The fourth option is to run SR over RSVPT. Again, this solves the accounting problem, but the drawback is that you're relying on a protocol that you're trying to migrate away from in order to introduce a new protocol. The last option is a bit similar to option 3, except that you wouldn't need to upgrade your IGPT. You don't need to update your computation logic. The idea is to measure SR traffic utilization on each T interface and dynamically adjust the bandwidth allowed for use by RSVPT. This is just a high-level view of the procedure that's outlined in the draft. The draft discusses that in much greater detail. I would recommend you to go through that and reach out to the authors if you have any questions or comments. We have received some great feedback so far. We're hoping the working group would find this useful at some point and adopt it in due course of time. That's all I have.
30 seconds discussion. I think
Very quickly, can you go back to the central controller one? There you mentioned that it should be both, like both RSVPT and SRT needs to be given to the controller. And since RSVPT right now will be distributed, it's a problem. But why can't we just do SRT deployed via central controller? So we know that it's always the bandwidth. We know the bandwidth, which is RSVP coming from the IGP. And this is the one which I'm allocating. So I feel like we can still handle that case. My biggest issue actually is that I would not know whether one node is doing this process and another node is not doing that process, because we will never signal it. It's a local idea that a node will actually update based on SR traffic or not update. So even
we should take that to the list. I'm
when
sorry.
we interrupt, there might be an issue. So we need to maybe.
So the next question, I'm sorry, has to go to the list.
Very quick one, just the max reservable bandwidth. If you could also update the pool 0, pool 1 for DeepServe TE, RDM, and MAM.
Yes, I agree.
By the way, I'm Rakesh.
All right, thank you.
Okay, so we have now 4 minutes and 30 seconds. Why this idea? Because we have a draft in CCamp, the OSPF availability extension, which wants to define a new TLV and put it into the switching capability specific information of the ISCD. This is not possible, at least not the way we wanted to do it. Why? Because into the ISCD, the SCSI field part is tightly connected with the switching capability. For example, if you have the switching capability value 1, PSC, you are forced to use those 3 fields in the switching capability specific information. If you use 100, for example, TDM, that's what you need to use. So, what are the possible solutions with this new draft? Make the availability sub TLV the SCSI part of a new switching capability. Or the problem is that if you don't want to use it, you need to duplicate any new switching capability that you want to define. Suppose that we will have a new switching capability X, and you want to be able to support the availability TLV or not. You need to define 2 switching capabilities. X.1 with a given SCSI and X.2 without the support for the SCSI. This solution would be backward compatible, but wouldn't allow for backward utilization of this sub-TLV. Because for all the existing switching capabilities, it wouldn't be possible to use this TLV. What is proposing this draft? This draft is proposing to define a generalized SCSI format composed by 0 or more sub-TLVs called SCSI TLVs. The idea is to start using these TLVs for the newly defined switching capabilities, and obviously define a new registry called generalized SCSI TLV types, and so that the availability TLV can be the first of this series of TLVs. This is backward compatible. Obviously, unfortunately, it doesn't allow for backward utilization because this wouldn't apply to existing switching capabilities, but this is a generalized solution for future definition of switching capabilities. There is one open issue, call it issue, thing to be decided, which is whether to split the range of values to have it something like specific technologies or others, something like that. This is something to be discussed. The allocation shall indicate the value or values to be used. Like a new TLV is not is no longer bounded to switching capability, but it must be possible to define a new TLV, use it for switching capability 7, 10, and 12. This is the idea. Next steps. We would like to move this one quickly because it's a showstopper for a CCamp draft that already passed the last call. If this draft is approved, we would like to update that draft, reference this one, and define the availability TLV like the first of the generalized sub-TLVs. Thanks.
Comments?
Hi, this is Amy from Huawei. So personally, I support this solution. I think it's a smart solution that to prevent us from to define several technology-specific types for each. So unfortunately, RFC 4203 doesn't define the SCSI field in TLV types. And I think this introduction of a generalized SCSI will solve the problems and could, if any future capabilities raised, then it can be just associated with this generalized SCSI. So regarding to the open discussion, I don't have a strong preference. I think 8-bit will be quite enough. Yeah. Okay, thank you.
Let's, good. Thanks for your comment. Let's do a quick poll. How many of you agree that this is a problem that needs to be solved? Okay, good number. How many of you have read the document? Around the same number. How many of you think that this draft is ready to be progressed to the next stage, to be adopted? How many of you think this draft is ready to be adopted? Not as many as the number of people who read it, but still a good number. I think we'll make a call on this after this meeting.
Well, thank you for staying over a couple of minutes. I think this has been a very productive first session in Seoul, so look forward to the rest of a good and interesting busy week. Please don't forget that later today in CCamp we're having a joint session, and look forward to seeing you all there. Thank you very much for participating. And thank you to the remote participants as well.
Thank you.
I'll send out the stuff right Let's you should take them all. Yeah, you're awesome.
I'm not sure they make any sense.
You're awesome. No, seriously, thank you.
Hopefully
You
you
actually, if you ever do it again, you actually don't do it like this. People say, because it's sort of the presentation, so once you see the video,
Yeah.
the discussion is the stuff you gotta copy.
Yeah.